statewide headquarters. A lot of people weren't here last week. Can you just raise your hands if you were here last week? That's what I thought. A lot of new folks. But I won't do the whole introduction that I did last time. But I just do want to say, for those folks that weren't here last time, that this is a very exciting period for the Florida Historical Society. Ben DiBiase, who you all know, is now our Director of Educational Resources. He just got a promotion. We also, for the first time in our 156-year history as an organization, have a Director of Development, Juliet Fletcher, who some of you know, and she's here this evening as well. Definitely one of the most exciting things happening is the creation of our new Florida Historical Society Archaeological Institute. And archaeology is nothing new to the Florida Historical Society. In fact, for more than a century, we've been actively involved in archaeology, and we were the only statewide organization involved in archaeology as it was developing as a discipline in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The ways that we've contributed just go on and on. We were the first to publish about archaeology. We were the first to collect artifacts, and we've been actively involved throughout the century with archaeology, and this is the latest step in that, the Florida Historical Society Archaeological Institute. So thank you for being here. This is just the second presentation we've done. Here, Rachel's been going all over talking to folks about archaeology, but I want to encourage you to become a member of the Florida Historical Society as well this evening. We do so many things, and the FHSAI is a new thing that we do, but we do things all over the state that need your support. We have educational outreach that includes our Florida Historical Society Press. We publish nonfiction books, of course, but also novels that are based in Florida history. We manage the Historic Rossiter House Museum down in O'Galley. We have our radio program that we were just listening to, Florida Frontiers. You were just listening to it live out of Pensacola. We streamed it over the internet. It airs all over the state. We have all kinds of great activities, but it requires your support. And you have a membership brochure there on your chair. You also have some information about FHSAI. We're encouraging you, if we know you like archaeology, if you want to contribute at a larger level to support archaeology in particular, we'd love to have you do that as well. If you become a member of the Florida Historical Society in support of FHSAI or all of our activities, you'll get a tote bag like this, and our new tote bag has our FHS logo, but it also has the new FHSAI logo as well on the back in support of archaeology. As usual, you will get our newsletter, the Society report, and our quarterly, our Florida Historical Quarterly, which was the first to publish archaeology, as well as a special incentive to become a member because you're here for our FHSAI lecture. Just for Archaeology Month this month, and just for the folks that come here to our library, we will also include Rachel Wentz' new edited book called Searching Sand and Surf, The Origins of Archaeology in Florida. And as I mentioned, the Florida Historical Quarterly has been publishing about archaeology for a century. She has collected the best of these articles and put them in a new book called Searching Sand and Surf. And it is it's at the printer, and it's in process, but we will have it for her talk at the end of the month. So we'll give you that book as well. So please do become a member of the Florida Historical Society. It's very important. And we're really happy to have so many of you here this evening. I know some of Lee Bailey's students are here, and you need to sign in on a sheet at the front. So please make sure you do that if you're one of Lee Bailey's students. And thank you very much for being here. And here is the director of the new Florida Historical Society Archaeological Institute, Dr. Rachel Wentz.
Please help yourself to some of that. I also want to thank you all because we kind of made a call for donations last week, and you all really came through, and that enables us to continue our lecture series and to bring people from out of town, which is really important, so we get a really good diversity. So thank you very much. We have our little bucket on the back table, so if you have some change, just toss it our way. If you also don't have a schedule for the rest sale. And Ben's pointing to a piece of paper. Oh, an evaluation sheet.
Yeah, it's on there. It's on their seat.
On your seat.
Interrupt for a second. This helps us to get grants. We put an evaluation sheet, and if you just take a second to fill it out, I forgot to mention that. It just asks you a couple of quick questions, but it is a big help to us. And it lets us know what you like as well. So please take a moment to fill this out.
And you can do it at the end of the talk, because I know you're not going to want to miss any of this lecture. It's going to be an excellent presentation. We're lucky that we have a wonderful gifted student here in our midst, Patrisha Meyers. And she's a student of John Schultz, who many of you have heard here. John has spoken to us before. He's a forensic archaeologist and anthropologist at the University of Central Florida. He had a big role in the Casey Anthony trial, so fascinating guy. And Patrisha has a good fortune of being assigned him and working under him. She got her BA from UCF in anthropology, then she went off up north for some strange reason to Mercyhurst, but there she got a graduate certificate in forensics and in biological anthropology. Now she's come back to Florida, and she hangs around with that guy, Kevin Gadusko, but we're not going to hold that against her. She's working on her MA in anthropology under Schultz, and she's going to talk to us about the history of forensic anthropology, which should be a great talk. So I'll turn it over to Patty.
So as Rachel said, I work with Dr. Schultz at the University of Central Florida. He not only teaches at the university, he also consults with the District 9 Medical Examiner's Office. So I've had the opportunity to work forensic cases with him there. While I was in Erie, Pennsylvania, which was quite cold, and I was there last winter, which was not as bad as this winter, thank goodness. I had the opportunity to work with Dr. Dennis Dirkmatt, who is the top forensic archaeologist, with Dr. Steve Sims, who is one of the, if not the top trauma expert in the United States and around the world. He recently analyzed Geneva, looking at the trauma there. And with Dr. Owsley, who is the developer of a system I'll tell you about for analyzing stature. Can everybody hear me okay? No? Let me see if I can get you a microphone. Any better? How about now? I don't know if it's turned on.
Let's try this stand mic, because I hear that it supposedly works in theory.
Okay. Yeah.
There we go. It says green, so.
Okay. Can you guys hear me better? Okay, great. So tonight, I'm going to talk to you about forensic anthropology, past and present. And Alfred Kroeber, who was a student of Franz Boas, who I'm sure many of you have heard is considered the father of anthropology. So Alfred Kroeber said that anthropology is the most humanistic of the scientists and the most scientific of the humanities. And by the time I'm done speaking tonight, I hope you'll understand why I think this quote really sums up anthropology in general and what we contribute to science and to society. So on that note, I'd like to talk a little bit about what anthropology is before we get into forensic anthropology. And I know for some of you this is old hat, but for others the idea of how archaeology fits in, how what I do forensic anthropology fits in, is a little bit confusing because it's all under this big umbrella of anthropology with the core distinct subfields. Archaeologists look at material culture, what as humans we leave behind. Cultural anthropologists look at cultural behavior, how culture affects our behavior, how our behavior affects culture. And linguistics look at languages. And this is a really small subfield, but it's a really important one. Right now there are about 7,000 languages that are spoken around the world. And according to National Geographic's estimates, one language dies every 14 days. And by the year 2100, of these 7,000 languages, half of them will be gone. So linguistics work in many ways, but one of the things they do is they go out and they collect these languages, they document them before the last speaker of the language passes on. And then physical anthropology. And that's what we do. We look at human remains. There are two main subfields of physical anthropology. Bioarchaeology, so bioarchaeologists look at human remains at a population level. They want to know, when they analyze all these skeletons, personal conflict, what kind of trauma do they see? Forensic anthropologists look at skeletal remains at the individual level. What we want to know is who was this person, what happened to them before death, what happened to them around the time of death, and what happened to them after death but before they were discovered. So overall, anthropology is the study of humanity, all the things that make us human across geographic regions and through time. So forensic anthropology itself, because as you see, we came through that field of, all forensic anthropologists are physical anthropologists. So we take the methods that were originally developed in physical anthropology and we apply them and additional methods to the study of one individual and what we can learn from the skeleton about this particular individual and how that fits into our medical legal system. So we're looking at it from a legal standpoint. We're going to cover a little bit of the history of forensic anthropology in America, which is really interesting. And even though I just told you all forensic anthropologists are physical anthropologists, that's not where we started. Forensic anthropology has its roots in anatomy and anatomists in the early 1800s to about 1938. Thomas Dwight over here is considered the father of American anthropology. He was an anatomist from Harvard, and he wrote The Identification of the Human Skeleton, a Medical Legal Study. He's the first one who wrote and talked about human identification from the skeletal remains. During his time, in this early period, 1800s to 1938, there were two sensational crimes. You know, we had O.J. Simpson, they had the Parkman murder and the Luger case. We're going to talk a little bit about the Parkman murder, but because Rachel's put me on a time constraint, I'm not going to give you both cases, but if you like what you hear about this or it piques your interest, I'd encourage you to look up the Luger case. There's a book called Alchemy of Bones that really covers what happened here, and the little synopsis is there was a sausage maker in Chicago at the turn of the century who didn't like his wife. So I'll leave it up to you to go find out what happened to her. The consolidation period. So what happened is we moved from these early 1800s to 1938 with anatomists starting to understand how useful studying the human skeleton can be in a legal way into this period from 1939 to 1971 where physical anthropologists start to say, well, we know a lot about the human skeleton. How can we take this and how can we help in the legal system? The Wilton Merriam Krogman is very instrumental. He wrote 2 bulletins for the FBI explaining to them how looking at the skeleton could help them in what they're doing. And then T. Dale Stewart was the curator of physical anthropology at the Smithsonian. And the Smithsonian and the FBI at that time were pretty close together, so they would bring over a box of bones and would say, what can you do with this? What can you tell us? So that time period was really critical of bringing it out of anatomy and into physical anthropology. And then the modern period, from 1972 to present. During this time, it's where we grew from just being physical anthropologists into being forensic anthropologists, having our own subfield and being very specific in how our study helped out in the legal system. JPAC is the Joint POW-MIA Accounting Command. It's centered in Hawaii, and I'll show you a little later, they have regions around the world. But they are one of the most interesting organizations to have come out during this time period because what they do is they try to bring all of the servicemen and women from foreign conflicts home. And this really grew out of the Second World War because people were dying so fast that they couldn't always be buried or brought home. And they started then to say, well, we're gonna find a way to bring everyone home. And that's where JPAC has their roots. During this time period, physical anthropology also joined the American Academy of Forensic Sciences. So we now have our own section that contributes to the whole study of forensic sciences. And additionally, we developed, or a board was established, the American Board of Forensic Anthropology, to certify people to say, you do know what you know, and you can contribute, and you can give expert testimony. Others besides board certified are also capable of giving expert testimony, but the board is a level of professionalism. And currently there's still less than 100 board certified forensic anthropologists in the country. So you can see we're a very, very young field. So going back to the Parkman murder. These 2 gentlemen, Dr. Parkman and geology at Harvard, and were both fairly well respected. The difference between them is Dr. Parkman was very frugal. He retired from teaching and went into real estate, into lending money. Professor Webster had a very lavish lifestyle. So he was frequently in debt, and often in debt to Dr. Parkman. He offered his collection, his mineral collection, as collateral against a loan of about $2,400, which at this time was a substantial amount of money. Dr. Parkman heard through the grapevine that Dr. Webster was now trying to sell the same mineral collection to someone else, which of course would have left him with an unsecured loan. So he went over to Dr. Webster's office, his laboratory, to discuss this. While he was there, this gentleman from Littlefield, who was the janitor, was in the laboratory when Dr. Parkman came in. So he knew he came in November 23rd, right before Thanksgiving, 1849. He went out of the room to leave the two men to talk, but he overheard loud voices. He could tell there was some sort of a conflict. And so he went home. After this point, no one heard from Dr. Parkman again. So Thanksgiving rolls around. Dr. Webster comes over to the janitor's house and gives him a turkey, which was out of character and raised suspicion. So Littlefield went over to Webster's laboratory while he was out, broke into it, and actually broke through a vault covering oven that he had his wife standing guard, and found remains of a body. So what they found, you can see right here, all the dark areas are what they found. All the little bits of the cranium, there's only a little bit that's left because he tried to burn that in his furnace. You can see the mandible, how very fragmented the parts they recovered were. So they brought in Dr. Jeffrey Wineland and Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes to analyze these remains. And they took a look at what was left. They found some dentures that had been made and went back to the dentist who made the dentures and were able to fit them to the mold. They came up with a profile from these remains of a 5'10" and a half inch white male between the ages of 50 and 60, which of course was a consistent, what we would call biological profile of Dr. Parkman. So Webster went to trial. And Oliver Wendell Holmes, one of the anatomists who analyzed the remains, had known, because these are all members of this, upper society of Boston, he had known Webster, and he said, he's a good guy, he was pleasant in the lecture room, a little excitable, but no one would have expected this. He was charged with murder, and I think the sequence here is really interesting when we think about our legal system today. He was charged with murder on January 26th. The trial began on March 19th, and the verdict was reached after only 2 3/4 hours of deliberation on March 30th. So he very swiftly was brought to justice. It was in all of the papers, and this is kind of what brought to the forefront in people's minds that the skeletal remains can speak for the deceased in a trial. On May 4th, Webster's lawyers said, well, we'd really like a writ of error, which was denied. So then Webster said, well, yeah, I did kill him, but it was self-defense. And that didn't really work either. So he was taken to Boston's Leverett Street jail, and he was publicly hanged within a year of committing the murder. So swift justice at the time. And one of the things that really struck me about the case, although it doesn't specifically speak to forensic anthropology, I think it speaks to humanity, is Dr. Parkman's widow. So this man has been violently murdered by Webster, set up a fund for Webster's widow and children. So it's nice to see, even with this kind of craziness, there's still a spark of humanity. So that's our history. That was the first big case that brought it to people's attention. So this is where are we today? How does a forensic anthropologist become involved in a forensic investigation? It can come about in several ways. Someone stumbles on a set of human remains. They call law enforcement. They call a medical agency. There's 2 types of medical agencies that typically involve forensic anthropologists. Here in Florida, we work under a medical examiner system. An ME is a forensic pathologist. They are a medical doctor first. They go to medical school like every other And then, like some people specialize in, neurology, cardiology, they specialize in forensic pathology, so that when someone passes away, they can look at the body and determine cause and manner of death. So your cause of death can be what caused you to die, a heart attack. Your manner of death can be what brought that heart attack on. So there are different things that go into deciding if something becomes part of our legal system or if it's just someone's time to go and it just happened. So any of these agencies can contact a forensic anthropologist. The coroner agency is a little bit different. They're elected officials. There are many states around the country that still use coroner systems. And when I was in Pennsylvania, the cases we worked came through coroner's offices. It's very different. You do not need a medical background. You do not need a criminalistic background. You can own a restaurant. You can own a gas station, as long as you're elected to the position. But with that said, all of the coroners that we worked with up there really want to do the right thing. So what they do is they call someone in, they call in a forensic anthropologist, and they say, what does this look like? If it's skeletonized, or if it's partially skeletonized, or if it's a fully fleshed body, they look at it and they say, should this go to an ME? So even though they don't have an ME, the first and foremost, it can still go to one. Once we're contacted by an agency to come in and to take a look at the remains, the first thing we have to decide is it forensically significant? And what that means is, should it go through our legal system, or is it just someone who passed away? You look at these two pictures, and looks out in the woods, that's not usually what you would expect, but doesn't necessarily mean it's something that should go through the legal system. Could a homeless person have wandered off and just passed away? This one, you see the ligature around the hands? That really does look suspicious. Most people don't tie up their own hands and go off into the woods and die. But as you look at it and you look a little closer, these bones right here, see how short they are related to these bones? In the human body, there's more proportion between your upper and lower limbs. So this is actually not human. This is a sea lion. Now, it may really still belong in the legal system because only Native Americans are allowed to hunt sea lions, but it's not something a forensic anthropologist would get involved in. So what we do is we go through a process of elimination, and we look at whatever remains have either been brought to us or that we've gone out into the field to see, and we decide first, is it bone or is it not bone? Well, if it's bone, is it human or is it not human? Well, if it's human, is it forensically significant? Or could it be one of these categories, none of which are forensically significant? Could it be archaeological, cemetery? Could it maybe be a trophy skull? Or could it be a discarded teaching specimen? So we're going to go through each one of these and kind of look at what those things look like. Bone versus non-bone. There are a lot of things that look like bone. As bone wettens, it's left out to the elements. It's wet, it's dry, it's hot, it's cold. You get cracking and crazing and delamination. So a lot of things can look like that. This piece right here could look like a piece of cranium that's cracked from weathering, but what it actually is a piece of pottery. This piece right here is a human long bone that's calcined, and that's why it's so white. It's been burnt to the point that it's just totally calcined. Several other things can look like bone. Coconut can look a lot like cranial bone, believe it or not, a coconut shell, and it's often on a student's practical and osteology class so that they can tell them apart. Burnt wire, burnt plastic can look like burnt bone, and the burnt bone is one of the things that is hardest to tell because everything burns and looks very similar. And a clay pipe, I thought this one was interesting, in an archaeological context, really looks a lot like a human fibula, a fragment of a human fibula. So then we have to figure it out. What is it? Is it bone? And there are different ways we go about it. We look at macroscopic methods. That's what we can see with our eyes. Texture, the anatomy. There are anatomical landmarks on all of our bones from our muscle attachments, and there's things that are very specific. You can look at it and you can say, yeah, that's bone. I can see that's part of the deltoid tuberosity. I know what that is. There are others in taste, and this is from my archaeological friends. It's not really taste. What they tell me is you take a piece of bone and you put it on your tongue and it sticks. But lithic or pot microscopic methods, what you can see under the microscope. Bone has specific compact surfaces, it has graininess, but you can't always tell that way either. So now what we're really looking at is chemical analysis. Bone has a very specific calcium to phosphorus ratio. There's a girl in my cohort who is doing her thesis on just this, being able to differentiate chemically if something is bone or not. The next thing we need to find out is, like I showed you the sea lion, is it human or is it not human? Between 25 and 30% of all suspected forensic cases aren't even human. So turtle shell really looks like cranium. Again, another thing that we see on our osteology practical exams so that we can tell them apart. This is one of my favorites. An alligator femur looks a lot like a human clavicle, especially when things are fragmented. When bones are whole, it's a different story, but what we generally find is things that have been weathered, they can be in fragments, they can be beat up. This right here is an alligator femur. This right here is a human clavicle. So those are the things that we learn to differentiate. And long bone fragments are really one of the hardest. It depends on what part of the bone you have, if there are any anatomical landmarks to see. But this is a piece of a deer long bone, and this is a piece of a human humerus. And I mentioned the deltoid tuberosity earlier. Just that little bump there is what that is. It's a piece of the muscle attachment for your deltoid. So anywhere that we have muscles, you're going to see a result on the bone because it pulls and it builds bone up. Once you get past that, we have the same thing. We have macroscopic methods, microscopic methods, and we're moving on again into more technologically advanced methods, particularly DNA. That's something that we're using a lot more these days, but you do have to be able to get a good DNA sample. So going back to those four categories I showed you along the bottom, how do we know if we come across a set of remains? Is it forensic? Is it a murder? Or is it something that may be eroded out from a cemetery or archaeological context? For cemetery and archaeological remains, there are a lot of things that are different that we can look at, that we can say, yeah, that's probably what this is. The bones themselves are, because they're older and they've been exposed more, are lighter in weight than modern remains are. Erosion and flaking, like I showed you how you could have the cracking from the fire, also from periods where the ground is saturated and eventually caskets deteriorate and water can get into the bones. From periods of wet and dry, you get this flaking of the bone. And of course, if things haven't completely deteriorated, period clothing and jewelry. Another thing that's very interesting that we can see, all of these are the remnants of embalming. And since the Civil War, embalming has become much more popular. That was the time when they started, it was developed before that, but that's the time period where people wanted their loved ones home. So embalming was used much more often. So this is a mouth former, this is an eye cup, this is a trocar plug. So all of these are things that say to us, this body's been embalmed, so it's probably not forensic. This was interesting to me to find out. These are old embalming fluid bottles, and in the past, funeral directors just tucked them right in the casket with the body, disposed of them that way. So they're not uncommon to find in an archaeological or cemetery context. You can also find, if it's in a container, obviously it's been buried intentionally, not forensically. But what if the container is worn away? You can still have the hardware that sticks around a lot longer. And then there are still effects on the bones themselves. When a bone has lain in a casket for a really long time, when a body has, there are wear patterns along the bottom. If the casket has collapsed on the front of it, you can get the same patterns on the front of the body. So there are a lot of things. Staining of the bones, if they come in contact with soil, different soils stain differently. But most of them have tannins in them, which get into the bone and give it that kind of brown or darker archaeological look that you might have seen in some pictures. Period clothing, jewelry. Native American remains are a unique category into themselves. 1990, NAGPRA, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, was federally enacted that says they need to be left alone and protected. Each state has their own statutes that also protect them. So if someone comes across remains that are likely Native American, a forensic anthropologist will contact a state archaeologist. And they may work in tandem to decide what to do about those, but it's their call as far as generally they try and leave them in place. But to determine if they're Native American, there is a suite of characteristics we can look at again here. Their burials are a little different. There's not going to be a container. They may be flexed, semi-flexed, or straight burials. Again, you're going to have staining, particularly from the body being in contact with the soil. They're often in context with mounds or shell middens. And the interesting thing about that is the shells have a lot of calcium carbonate, and as it rains, it leaches out of the shells and it gets on the body, which it can actually act as a preservative, so that remains in this context may be in better shape than ones which are directly in the soil, because our soils here tend to erode bodies very quickly. Cranial modifications, Native Americans had cultural practices, swaddling babies against a board. It's called cradle boarding, and you can see that in a flattened place on the skull, even as an adult. And most Native Americans are going to have what we call a suite of Asian characteristics, because we do believe that the Americas were populated coming through Asia, and we do see that. But they're a little bit different. They seem to have more robust muscle attachments, maybe based on the foods they were eating from mastication. So we can see that, and we see extreme dental wear, again, based on the foods that they're eating. The artifacts that you might find in a Native American burial include pottery, lithics, worked bone. So again, you look at both the body and the context that you find the body in. Trophy skulls are a different category that I don't know how many people are aware of this practice, but if you think back about it, it kind of makes sense. Back to antiquity, you've heard of people taking souvenir body parts, shrunken heads. Even in our own Civil War, the South was known to take body parts from the North and save them. Sure, the North was had the same practice, but what's been published is more things that have been found about the South. During the Second World War, and Vietnam in particular, are the types of trophy skulls that a forensic anthropologist most often comes in contact with. There's been some research done to suggest that, particularly during the Second World War, because we don't see this as much with European skulls, Europeans were more like us, but Asians were different. In our propaganda, when you go back and you look at the war propaganda, we villainize them differently. We villainize everybody, it's just part of war. But the Asians are more considered animals, they're called rats. And there was a culture, it is suggested, that led servicemen to feel, especially after the atrocities they faced there, that this was an acceptable practice. The War Department never, ever accepted it or promoted it. But it does happen. And you'll often find things like this, like here, where you see there's graffiti on the skull, there can be paint, there can be wax, because this has been something that's been brought back. Some of these families are very fond of this because it's part of their familiar culture. So we do find that that happens occasionally, it turns up, and then we have to say, no, it's not forensically significant. It's important, but it's not something that will go through our legal system now. And this behavior has to be considered in the context of the time period and what these young men were going through at that time. And teaching specimens is the last category of non-forensically significant things that people come across. And there was a university in North Dakota that was recently putting in some construction, some new roads, and they hit some human remains. After they were analyzed, what they found is it was an anatomical specimen. It still had some mummified tissue, and they could see where the dyes had been injected for the medical students to see and understand where the veins and the arteries went. And at that time, it was, they just buried it right there on the property. So we have to be able to tell the difference between a clandestine grave and something like that, where a teaching specimen has just been discarded. Teaching specimens are interesting right now because in 1985, India, who was the main supplier, now we certainly created our own specimens here in the United States, they created them in Europe, but India was the world supplier for almost 200 years of anatomical, osteological teaching specimens, articulated like the skeletons you see in the classroom. In 1985, a shipment of about 1,500 juvenile specimens was shipped out of India, and there was an outcry because there was concern body farm in Tennessee. What they have is a donor system. So they do their taphonomic studies, the decomposing that you've heard about, all of that they do. And then they curate the skeleton. So there are skeletons for students to go and learn from people who have donated. And it's important to get the message out there that just as you can donate your body as a cadaver, you can also donate your skeleton. And it is such an important resource. So there are things we look for to see, is it a teaching specimen? See all this hardware, all of the holes that are drilled. And this is a juvenile skull from India. And you can see how detailed the dissection cuts are and how much a student can learn from what they can see here. So this is a juvenile from India. This is an adult from India. This is an African American from France. So they came from all over, and they were often underprivileged, or disenfranchised members of society, a lot of times the poor. So there's a lot of controversy that goes on about how we came about our teaching specimens in the past and how we should go about it in a more socially conscious way in the future. So, what do we do when it is forensic? If your loved one were missing, how would you describe him or her? Would you say how tall they were? Were they a boy or a girl? Where did they come from? What was their background? Were they Hispanic? Were they white? Were they African American? These are all the things that when we receive a set of remains to analyze, we have to build this biological profile. And as you can see, there's so much diversity that this is, it's a task that takes a lot of time to learn. And there's so much human variation just between all of us that might have a similar background. Our bones are all just a little bit different. So that's one of the things that forensic anthropology students learn is it human variation or is it something truly different? For age, we look at several different things. And we're all either developing or deteriorating. Those are the only two things. And unfortunately, once you hit about 25, it's all deteriorating. But before that, humans are born with about 300 to 400 bones. I mean, we have a lot of bones when we're born because they're not all fused together. All of us here have about 206 bones. But before we fuse together, this line right here is where you achieve growth. And this is the epiphyseal end. So we look at that and we look at different places on the body and we see if that's fused. And that helps us know, is it a juvenile, is it an adult? We look at the dentition. We look at how the roots are formed. Are they fully formed? Are they partially formed? What age does this happen? Dentition is really one of the best ways because it's more predictable than other things are. And then we look at deterioration. The sternal rib ends. This is an old guy. You get all of this kind of cragginess as you get older. You get that in all your bones. You get arthritic lipping. You get a lot of things as we get older. So we look at that. We look at developmental changes or degenerative changes. Then we look at sex. We look, are you male or female? There's two main areas we use to determine sex. The cranium and the pelvis. You can see generally females are more gracile, males are more robust. And what we mean by that is it's smoother. All the surfaces are a little smoother on a woman. This right here is called the mastoid process. It's smaller in a woman. See how wide it is here in a man? The nuchal crest right here, see how he's got almost a little hook right there? And she's all nice and smooth. The angle of the jaw is different. So we look at right here, this temporal line is much more pronounced in a man. And that goes back to the robusticity of the muscles. Men have much more robust muscles. Anywhere you have muscle pulling on bone, you get a bone reaction that builds that bone up to handle the muscle. The pelvis is very different for obvious reasons. Women's pelvises are wider, they flare more because we have babies. So they have a lot of diagnostic features as well. Stature, and this is where I was talking about Dr. Owsley at Mercyhurst, developed a statistical program. He is a statistical genius. But just beyond me, I'm still working on my baby stats. But his program helps someone like me because I know how to use the program. I can take measurements of long bones, put them in the program, and then it's based on logistical regressions to determine from these long bones how tall this person might have been in life. give you a quick case study. I spent summer before last in Lithuania and had a wonderful time there looking at archaeological remains, but using these same processes to build a biological profile of a single individual. I looked at remains from Elidis, which is a beautiful area of Lithuania. There was a hill fort built here about 1365. It was established on this western bank of the Umanis River because this is a major trade route. The same reason we built settlements here in the United States and Native Americans built settlements. Trade routes have always been important. By 1370, there was a village growing around the castle that was there, and the earliest cemetery artifacts that they excavated were from the 14th century. This is just an aerial view to kind of give you an idea of the geography. And this is the cemetery there. When they excavated, there were 1,452 graves. The grave we looked at was right here. So they document it so you know which individual came from where, and they can look at a whole population. So we look at the cemetery demographics, and this is a little bit of the bioarchaeology. We looked at, there were 1,373 individuals, 1,152 intact graves, and 300 disturbed graves. And the demographics of the people buried there were really interesting because it was pretty well split between males and females and a little higher number of juveniles, which is kind of an expected ratio given the high infant mortality, young juvenile mortality at the time. The individual we looked at, we had to determine this biological profile we've talked about. So for sex, I looked at her cranium. Well, now I've told you it's her. I looked at the cranium. She had this rounded, kind of V-shaped mandible. She had a narrow, the sides of it as they come up. I showed you the mastering processes. Hers were small, they didn't project out. There's, actually, I'm going to show you that. Not. Good. Okay. So right here, again, right here. This is our zygomatic, our cheekbones. You know, women like these high cheekbones. For women, it stops right about here. And if you touch your ear, the opening, we call it external auditory meatus, it stops right about there. But for a guy, it comes back behind it. So when I looked at this girl from Elidis, hers stopped before her ear. Postcranial features, we talked about the differences in the pelvis, how women's are more flared. So all of these are features that tell me she had this more wider, flaring pelvis. Looked at the age. So there are things we look at. The pubic symphysis face is in the front of the pelvic girdle, where it comes together. The face of that changes a lot in a kind of predictable way from the time you're young until the time you're old. So we take this and we analyze what these ridges and billows look like, and we give it a score. And then we looked at the clavicle, because this is the last thing to fuse. It fuses around the age of 25. So hers was already fused. So we are assuming late 20s, or mid-20s. And we looked at other parts of her pelvis to come up with an age range. We weren't able to consider ancestry because a lot of ancestry has to do with the morphology of the face, and I didn't have a complete cranium. So sometimes you have to say you don't have enough to fill in a category. And then using fornix, it came up with stature for her. And I'll have you note too, kind of all of these holes that you also saw here. And she had, see how short the second clavicle is? There was a fracture that had healed. That's all stuff we look at too. It's not part of the biological profile, but it is part of a forensic analysis. So looking at the cranial elements, on the front of her mandible, you have all of this lytic, we call lytic reaction. It's from infection in the bone. Here, you can kind of see these little bumps and indents. They're called gumas. So the interesting thing about this case is we were given the postcranial. Everything below the cranium, we were given first. So we started seeing a lot of this. We started seeing this what's called osteomyelitis, all of this eaten away bone. We saw cortical thickening, that's this outside part of your bone degradation. So that also tells you when you only have a partial skeleton, you can't always have all of the answers. But you get as many as you can from what you have to work with. So what do we know about her? What would our forensic analysis of this case be? Well, there was only one individual. I know this because there were no duplicate elements, and most of the elements were there. She was female. Couldn't come up with an ancestry. Based on what we put in Fortis, she was short. She was about 5'1", but she could have been anywhere from 4'9" to 5'3". And age at death, we always give it a little bit wider in range, even though I told you the clavicle generally fuses around 25. Human variation. Some people a little older, some people a little later. So we say she's between, say, 20 and 40 years. Antemortem means what conditions did she have before she died? Well, she had all this lytic reaction, she had bad dental health, she had that healed fracture. So we know a little bit about her life from that. Perimortem trauma means what happened at or around the time of death. There's nothing to indicate what caused her death, nothing to say what happened at or around the time of death. In a forensic case, if you have a gunshot wound to the head, then you've got something perimortem. Postmortem modifications, they had taken cuts out of her long bones in order to do DNA sampling because they were getting a DNA profile of this population. And taphonomy means what happened after death, what changes happened to this skeleton or to these bones that you've come up with. She was darkened, she had soil staining, there was deformation to the skull, and that's one of the things we have to look at and decide is this because somebody hit her? Is it blunt force trauma? But in this case, because of the age of it and the way the soil is compacted on it, you get this called plastic deformation, where the bone just bends and gives. It hasn't broken, but the weight of the soil has caused this deformation. There's some root damage and the wear and degradation you would expect in something this old. So, I'm watching the clock and I know I have to get through the rest of this a little bit quicker, so I'm sorry. I get so excited about the stuff I enjoy, which is maybe not the best way to introduce human rights. But this is an area I'm really interested in. I have a friend who's very involved in this in Africa. And I just think the people who do this work are amazing. Clyde Snow is really the forerunner of dealing with the aftermath of human rights violations and excavating mass graves. And he went down to Argentina, not to come in and say, we know how to do this, but to go there and to teach the Argentinians forensic practices. And they now have an amazing Argentinian forensic anthropology group that goes out and teaches others in the same way. So during the Dirty War from 76 to 83, 20,000 Argentinians were disappeared, men, women, and children. And what they're trying to do is excavate all the clandestine graves they can find and return these people to their families. When he first went there, he said the students were uneasy. You know, they hadn't been able to trust people in authority. And after that, he was able to work with them. They built a level of trust. And then they went from just Argentina to Guatemala, which also had a lot of atrocities. And they worked in the same way. They went out, they worked with Guatemalans, they have their own task force now. And they're working. This was the initiative, My Name Is Not XX, because they marked all these graves XX. And the idea is to identify these individuals and return them to their families, give them back their name and their place. This is Dr. Snow with Freddie Pecorelli. This man, and this is why I think these people are so amazing, and also my friend, they get death threats all the time, as she still does. And it's a very, very dangerous line of work, but it's an amazing thing that they do. The challenges that are unique to human rights are that you have the families very involved, and you've got this safety concern. Here, when we work on a forensic anthropology case, if we go out and we're doing recovery ourselves, we're all marked off with crime scene tape. Everybody stays away from us, and we do our work. There, because sometimes the only way to ID people is to know what clothes they were wearing or something specific about them, the families become very invested and involved in the whole process. So when I graduate, what am I going to do? Well, what a lot of people do, and what I thought at one time I would do, is work for JPAC. I told you a little bit about them earlier. I think they have one of the most amazing programs. They are the largest employer of civilian forensic anthropologists in the world. They have about So this is one thing that many forensic anthropologists do. Maybe down the road for me, I still have some schooling to finish up. But other forensic anthropologists like Dr. Schultz teach in a university and consult for a local medical examiner's office. I think that may be a road that I'll take. But Clyde Snow, you know how you talk about if there's one person you can meet. For me, if I could meet anyone, it would be Clyde Snow. And I love this quote by him, that bones make great witnesses, they speak softly, but they never forget and they never lie. So that's a little bit about forensic anthropology. I'd like to thank the FHSAI for inviting me out, and Dr. Schultz for his constant support and guidance and putting up with my crazy research interests. So, thank you. Joint POW MIA Accounting Command. So they're looking for anyone who's a prisoner of war, anyone who's missing in action for any reason, and they want to make an accounting of all these individuals. And that's their mottos till the last one comes home.
NPR had an interesting, catch the NPR story the other day.
No, but I read something recently about it.
It was very interesting because I've always been, interested in JPAC. It offered me a job when I had a job, so sometimes I wonder. But it was really interesting because it was the approaches that, the kind of conflicting approaches that JPAC takes versus, how forensic anthropology is done in the rest of the world, whether it's DNA driven, like most forensic anthropology, versus the way JPAC does it, which is through extensive historical research and documentation. They bring in a whole team, and of course, unfortunately, the bureaucracy. It was really interesting. So if you have interest in what they do, I would look up NPR's story. It was really intriguing. Yeah, that was.
Is DNA used a great deal in this
Yes.
field?
Yes. We worked on several cold cases recently, and they were all DNA. And we actually found a match to one of them, which was wonderful.
What are trocar plugs?
Trocar plugs, when you embalm a body, you take the blood out, you put fluid in, and then they use a trocar to do it,